When a police officer decides to use force against a disabled teenager, he has no idea he's about to face something far greater than he could have imagined. The town of Millbrook seemed like just another one of those places forgotten by time, where everyone knows each other and secrets are kept under lock and key. But on this scorching July afternoon, everything was about to change forever. The Valley Plaza shopping center buzzed with the typical energy of a Saturday afternoon. Families strolling through stores, children running down the corridors while their parents tried to maintain some semblance of control over the organized chaos of daily life. It was the kind of setting where nothing extraordinary ever happened, where the biggest news of the week might be about the ice cream parlor's new flavor. But fate had far different plans for this seemingly ordinary day. The suffocating heat of the American summer turned the asphalt of the parking lot into a furnace, creating heat waves that distorted vision like desert mirages. People rushed between cars, searching for the rare shade cast by the few strategically planted trees, while the air-conditioned stores nearby offered the promise of relief for those brave enough to endure a few more hours of shopping. It was in this environment that a chain of events would unfold, events that would forever change the lives of everyone involved. A cascade of consequences that would begin with a simple misunderstanding and end with revelations that would shake the very foundations of the small community. The stage was set for a drama no Hollywood screenwriter would dare to imagine, because sometimes reality surpasses any fiction. Among the mall's regular visitors were familiar faces known for their unwavering routines, like Mr. Martinez, who had his coffee every morning on the same bench near the fountain, or Mrs. Clara, who shopped at the exact same time every day, following a mathematical schedule she'd kept for over a decade. It was a social microcosm where each person had a well-defined role, where hierarchies were respected and change was viewed with suspicion. But it was also a place where human compassion still existed, even if it sometimes needed extraordinary circumstances to be awakened. What no one could foresee was that this seemingly ordinary Saturday would become the catalyst for a transformation that would echo far beyond the physical limits of that shopping center. The mall's security cameras recorded everything with silent precision, capturing every movement, every expression, every gesture. Details that would later be analyzed frame by frame by investigators, lawyers, and a media storm that would turn this once ordinary place into the stage for a national drama. It was as if the building itself were bracing to witness something monumentally important, something that would change not only the lives of those directly involved, but also an entire community's perception of justice, prejudice, and the true meaning of serve and protect. The stage was set, the characters in place, and the first act of this modern-day tragedy was about to begin. Tommy Richardson was only 16, but his eyes held the kind of maturity adversity forces a person to develop far too early. Seated in his custom wheelchair, he navigated the mall's corridors with the dexterity of someone who had turned physical limitations into superpowers of determination. His skilled hands propelled the wheels with smooth, practiced motions. He had just finished another physical therapy session at Dr. Peterson's clinic on the second floor of the mall, a routine he kept religiously 3 times a week since the accident that had changed his life 2 years ago. The smile lighting up his face as he greeted staff and fellow mall-goers revealed a personality that refused to be defined by limitations, someone who had learned to find strength where others saw only weakness. The school backpack hanging from the back of his chair swayed gently as he made his way toward the parking lot, carrying not just books and notebooks, but the dreams of a young man who refused to give up on his future. Tommy was in his senior year of high school, maintained excellent grades, and had plans to study engineering at the state university, a goal he pursued with the same ironclad determination that had helped him relearn how to live after the accident. His hands, strengthened by months of therapy and adaptation, controlled the wheelchair with such precision that it impressed everyone around him, transforming a medical device into a natural extension of his will to live fully. He was the kind of kid who inspired others without even realizing it, turning obstacles into stepping stones to reach even greater heights. The accident that had placed him in the wheelchair had been a turning point not just in his life, but for his entire family, especially his father, who carried a quiet guilt for not being there in that crucial moment. It was a Friday afternoon when Tommy decided to bike to his best friend's house, a seemingly simple decision that led to a collision with a drunk driver, forever altering the course of his life. The doctors had been clear about the prognosis, but Tommy and his family refused to accept limitations, turning every day of recovery into a victory against circumstance. He had found in adversity not a reason to give up, but a reason to prove that the human spirit can overcome any physical obstacle. As he approached the mall's exit, Tommy adjusted his backpack and checked his phone to confirm the time his father would pick him up, a sacred routine between them since the accident. He had no idea that in the next few minutes his life would once again be placed in danger, this time not by fate, but by the ignorance and prejudice of those sworn to protect citizens like him. The irony was cruel. A young man who had fought so hard to overcome his limitations and rebuild his life was about to face a threat not born of his own circumstances, but of the intolerance and abuse of power of those meant to safeguard him. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test not just physical strength, but the moral courage of everyone involved. The shopping center's parking lot bustled with typical Saturday activity as Tommy rolled through the automatic doors, the unrelenting heat radiating off the pavement in shimmering waves that blurred his vision as he scanned for his father's familiar car. A slight confusion crept over him as he realized he had wheeled into the wrong section of the lot, a simple mistake anyone could make, but one that, at that specific moment, would become the first domino in a devastating chain of events. The sound of cars, the movement of people carrying bags, and the distant hum of the mall's air conditioning created an urban symphony that masked the tension ready to erupt in this seemingly peaceful space. Tommy maneuvered his chair between parked cars, his tires making a soft noise on the hot asphalt, completely unaware that he was being watched by eyes that had already passed judgment on his presence. Marcus Bradley, the mall's security guard, had noticed Tommy the moment he exited the building, and something in his troubled mind interpreted the boy's presence as suspicious, perhaps influenced by his own prejudices about people with disabilities, or simply by the dull monotony of yet another uneventful workday. He approached with heavy steps, his rigid posture and scowling expression projecting an authority he believed he possessed, but in truth, it was just a mask for his own insecurities and personal frustrations. The badge on his uniform gleamed under the scorching sun, a symbol of power he had learned to wield as a shield against a world that had disappointed him time and time again. His hand rested casually on the walkie-talkie clipped to his belt, a gesture that had become second nature whenever he felt in control of a situation, even when that sense of control was nothing more than an illusion. "Hey, kid, what are you doing here?" Marcus's harsh voice cut through the air like a blade, filled with hostility that had no rational justification, born instead from the depths of a soul embittered by life. Tommy turned in his chair, startled by the aggressive tone, his eyes showing more confusion than fear. In his limited experience with the world, he still believed people were fundamentally good and that misunderstandings could be resolved with politeness and patience. "I'm just waiting for my dad to pick me up, sir," Tommy replied, with the courtesy his parents had instilled in him, his calm voice standing in stark contrast to the guard's belligerent tone, a contrast that should have been enough to disarm any rational person. But Marcus wasn't thinking rationally, and the boy's politeness only seemed to fuel his paranoia, as if kindness itself were some veiled form of manipulation or disrespect. The situation escalated quickly when Marcus decided Tommy was loitering in the parking lot, a wildly distorted interpretation of reality that said far more about the guard's state of mind than about anything the boy was actually doing. "I don't buy that story. You've been here too long. What are you really doing?" Marcus insisted, his voice rising in volume and drawing the attention of others in the lot, who began to pause their activities to watch the confrontation unfold. Tommy felt the first chill of fear crawl down his spine, not because he thought he had done something wrong, but because he recognized in the man's face and body language the telltale signs of a situation spiraling dangerously out of control. At that critical moment, more than ever, he needed his father, not just for physical protection, but as a voice of reason who could diffuse a situation becoming dangerously volatile for reasons Tommy couldn't fully understand. The sharp squawk of Marcus's walkie-talkie pierced the air as he called for backup, a decision that would turn a simple misunderstanding into a community-wide crisis. "I need police assistance in the parking lot. We have a suspicious situation here," he announced, his voice carrying a fabricated authority meant to conceal his own insecurity. Tommy watched him with growing unease, still not fully grasping how a normal afternoon had so suddenly spiraled into a nightmare. The response came in under 5 minutes. A distant siren grew louder and louder until a squad car pulled into the lot with lights flashing, creating a spectacle that drew dozens of curious onlookers who abandoned their shopping to witness the unfolding drama. Officer Bradley stepped out of the vehicle with the arrogant confidence of a man who believed he had complete control of any situation. His broad shoulders and imposing posture projected a presence carefully cultivated over years of service. Without realizing he was about to make the greatest mistake of his career. The officer's approach was immediate and aggressive, his heavy boots echoing against the asphalt as he strode toward Tommy, his expression a mix of suspicion and irritation at having been called out for what he assumed would be yet another trivial incident. "What's the problem here, kid?" Officer Bradley asked, his tone making it clear he had already decided Tommy was guilty of something, though even he couldn't articulate what. His hand instinctively rested on his holstered gun, a gesture that had become automatic anytime he felt even mildly challenged. Tommy tried once more to explain that he was just waiting for his father, but his words fell on deaf ears, as if the officer had already written a narrative in his head where the boy in the wheelchair was automatically a suspect for reasons even he couldn't consciously justify. The tension in the air was electric, and the gathered crowd began pulling out their phones, sensing they were about to witness something that demanded to be documented. What happened next shocked even the most skeptical of bystanders. Frustrated by what he saw as a lack of cooperation, Officer Bradley decided it was time to take control of the situation, a decision that revealed the true nature of his character. "Stand up when I'm talking to you," he shouted, seemingly forgetting or deliberately ignoring the obvious fact that Tommy was in a wheelchair. His absurd command echoed through the parking lot like a cruel reminder of the ignorance still deeply embedded in some corners of society. When Tommy calmly tried to explain his condition, his words were taken as defiance. That was the moment Officer Bradley completely lost control. He grabbed the arms of the wheelchair and violently tilted it forward, nearly dumping Tommy onto the sun-scorched asphalt. The brutal act was captured from at least a dozen angles, each cell phone recording the disproportionate violence unleashed on a defenseless young man whose only crime was existing in the wrong place at the wrong time, with the wrong skin color in the eyes of a system meant to protect him. Screams of horror erupted from the crowd as Officer Bradley yanked Tommy out of his wheelchair. The boy fell hard onto the searing asphalt, his motionless legs twisting into unnatural angles, a sight that would break the heart of anyone with a shred of humanity. "You will show me some respect, boy!" the officer bellowed, his voice laced with a rage wildly out of proportion, as though years of personal and professional frustration were being unleashed on an innocent teenager who had become the target of a violence he could never have anticipated. Tommy tried to drag himself back to his chair, his arms trembling not only from physical effort, but from the emotional shock of being treated like a criminal by the very people sworn to protect him. Tears of pain and humiliation welled in his eyes, though he fought to maintain the last remnants of his dignity. The crowd gathered around the scene was divided, some shouting in protest, others frozen in place by the shock of witnessing such brutality inflicted upon someone so clearly defenseless. Dozens of phones were held up, recording obsessively, capturing every second of the unfolding police violence. Others cried out for someone to call an ambulance, realizing Tommy might have suffered serious injuries in the fall. The mall manager, alerted by the commotion, rushed to the scene and froze, visibly horrified by what he saw. He immediately reached for his phone, knowing damage control calls would be necessary. Calls that might not be enough to contain the public relations disaster now spiraling out of control. It was as if the entire community had been forced to confront an uncomfortable truth about the very system they'd trusted to protect them. A revelation that would forever change the way they viewed authority and justice in their small town. An elderly woman who had witnessed the entire scene from the beginning stepped forward bravely, her cane trembling in her hand, her voice breaking with emotion as she pleaded with the officer to stop the senseless violence. "That boy did nothing wrong, for God's sake. He's hurt," she cried, her words echoing the indignation boiling in the hearts of everyone present who still possessed a functioning moral compass. But her intervention only aggravated the officer further. Feeling cornered and judged by a crowd he now perceived as hostile, Bradley's paranoia grew, escalating an already dangerous situation into something teetering on explosive. The moment had reached the point of no return. Each decision made from here on would only deepen the crisis, creating ripple effects far beyond the boundaries of that parking lot. That was when the roar of an engine tore through the chaos like thunder, and a black Ford pickup came barreling into the lot. People instinctively stepped aside as it screeched to a halt just yards from the confrontation. The driver's door flung open, and from it emerged a commanding figure who instantly shifted the energy of the entire scene. A tall, muscular man whose precise movements and military posture were unmistakable even at a distance. Staff Sergeant Michael Richardson, veteran of 2 deployments in Afghanistan, scanned the scene with ice-blue eyes, processing everything in seconds with the deadly efficiency of someone trained to assess threats on the battlefield. What he saw made his blood run cold. What no one in the crowd could have predicted was that Officer Bradley was no stranger to the veteran. In fact, they had served together in the same unit in the Middle East. A connection that transformed this confrontation into something far deeper and far more personal than anyone could have imagined. "Richardson? Mike Richardson?" Officer Bradley's voice cracked as he recognized the man now walking toward him with measured, dangerous strides. His expression shifted instantly from arrogance to something close to terror, because he knew exactly what his former comrade was capable of when provoked. Flashbacks of the battlefield surged into his mind, memories of watching Richardson neutralize threats with lethal, calculated calm, turning into something closer to a force of nature than a mere man. Now, that force was walking straight toward him, fists clenched, face set with a fury that promised consequences. The irony was cruel and poetic. 2 men who had once fought side by side for their country were now facing off on opposite sides of a fundamental moral divide. Only one of them had remained loyal to the values they were supposed to have risked their lives for. Fate had orchestrated a reckoning that would test not just their physical strength, but their moral integrity, and the outcome would forever alter the course of their lives and the lives of everyone watching. "Get your filthy hands off my son, Bradley." The words left Michael Richardson's mouth with a calm so cold it sent chills down the spines of even the most distant bystanders. His voice carried a weight forged in places where life and death were measured in milliseconds. Bradley immediately released Tommy and stumbled backward, his hands visibly shaking as battlefield memories surged through him. reminders of what Richardson had done in the past when pushed too far. "Mike, I didn't know he was your kid," Bradley stammered, his voice stripped of the authority it held moments before, revealing the coward behind the badge. Michael bent down, gently helping Tommy back into his wheelchair, with a tenderness that stood in sharp contrast to the lethal tension emanating from every muscle in his body. "You knew exactly what you were doing, Bradley. Just like you knew what you were doing when you abandoned our unit during that ambush in Kandahar," Michael said, his voice controlled but dripping with venom. Several in the crowd took a step back, sensing this was no longer just about police brutality. This was the resolution of a betrayal that began long before that day. The mention of the ambush made Bradley visibly pale. He knew the cowardice he had shown in the desert had cost lives. Now, Michael was dredging that ghost from the past and throwing it in his face, publicly, right in front of a community that had once seen Bradley as a protector. "You were always a coward, Bradley. But attacking a defenseless kid? That's low. Even for you," Michael continued, every word a scalpel of calculated psychological damage. His hands stayed loose at his sides, a posture any veteran would recognize as the calm before the storm. The tension reached its peak as Michael took another step toward Bradley, his physical presence completely dominating the space around them. His voice shifted into the commanding tone he had once used to lead men in combat. "You've got two options, Bradley. You can try to arrest me and find out if you still remember how to fight, or you can do the right thing for the first time in your pathetic life and hand over your badge before I tell everyone here how you let Sergeant Martinez die because you were too busy hiding behind a rock." His words cut through the air like sharpened blades, each syllable weighted with the kind of military secrets that could not only end Bradley's career, but obliterate his reputation in the community forever. The crowd was completely silent now, realizing they weren't just witnessing a confrontation between two men, but the public unveiling of truths long buried, now erupting into the daylight with devastating force. Bradley knew he was cornered. His mind raced in desperation, grasping for an escape that didn't exist, because Michael Richardson wasn't just a pissed-off father defending his son. He was a man who held enough information to utterly destroy him. "You can't prove any of that," Bradley muttered weakly, but his voice betrayed the panic of a man who knew he had already lost. Then, Michael slowly pulled out his phone and showed a recording that made Bradley's blood turn to ice. "Official Department of Defense recording," Michael said evenly. "Internal investigation into the death of Sergeant Martinez. Testimony from Corporal Johnson describing how you abandoned your post during combat." His finger hovered over the send button, one tap away from broadcasting the truth to every major news outlet in the country. The revelation that followed stunned the crowd into disbelief. Michael Richardson reached into his pocket and pulled out a badge, not just any badge, but one that shimmered gold in the sunlight. He wasn't just a veteran. He was Detective Lieutenant Michael Richardson, Internal Affairs Division, State Police. He hadn't moved to Millbrook by chance 2 years earlier. He had come as part of a deep, covert investigation into systemic corruption and abuse of power in the local police department. "For 6 months I've been collecting evidence on you and several other officers in this town, Bradley," Michael said with a cold smile. "And today, you gave me exactly what I needed to close the case." The phones that had captured the brutality against Tommy were no longer just bystander footage. They were the final piece in a much larger puzzle that would soon expose a network of corruption reaching all the way to the upper levels of the town's leadership. Tommy, still processing the revelation that his father had hidden his true identity to protect both the investigation and his family, felt a surge of pride and relief wash over him. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner, son," Michael said as he knelt beside Tommy's chair, his voice finally softening. "But I had to be sure. I had to clean out the rot that's been poisoning this town for years." Sirens wailed in the distance, multiple vehicles converging on the parking lot. Federal agents poured in, part of a long, orchestrated sting operation to make the arrests Michael had been preparing for months. Officer Bradley was placed in handcuffs, not only for the assault on a minor, but for an astonishing list of crimes, including extortion, evidence tampering, and conspiracy. The crowd stood in stunned reverence, watching the fall of a man who had abused his power for far too long. The small town of Millbrook would never be the same. But now it had a chance to become a place where real justice could take root, where the system could finally serve those it had long failed. And at the center of that transformation stood a brave young man in a wheelchair who had never asked to be a hero, but had become one nonetheless.